Alrighty, welcome back to another thrilling installment of Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fragath, and today we're going to finish up The Detective's Tale, The Long Goodbye, from Hyperion, the tale of Braun Lamia, her backstory. So previously on, and if you are listening to this after the fact, make sure you've listened to the installment before this, part 9, I guess, of Hyperion. Previously on, let's see, Braun Lamia, what to say? She's a PI, which makes her awesome already. She has just gotten a case from somebody named Johnny, who, as it turns out, is investigating his own murder. Because, you see, he's a cybrid, and a cybrid is basically a human body for an AI, kind of. He's also a sort of a personality recreation of John Keats, the poet. More on that later. After having gotten a lead on who might have done the skullduggerous murder of Johnny, they chased the guy. And it's a wild chase. It's a chase across space, through portals. Actually, it's a tour with many portals to different worlds. And this chase ends with the guy they're pursuing dead, burned from the inside out, which Lamia had nothing to do with, other than catching him and then him getting eradicated. So somebody doesn't want there to be evidence or to have anyone talking. And where we left off most immediately was Lamia has hopped on Maui Covenant a hawking mat, which is, I kid you not, an honest-to-God flying carpet. More on that later. This will be important. No spoilers with that statement. And it is not the only time we're going to see one. And the only portal to get out of her current dilemma, because the cops are like, hey, this person was right there chasing that guy who just kind of burned himself to a crisp, got burned to a crisp. Let's chase her because clearly she's got some connection to it. So the only portal to get her out of there, only wormhole, is 14 meters underwater, give or take. 8 fathoms, sorry, not quite 14 meters. And Johnny is helping her out. So we're going to resume from there. I'll read the last, I don't know, last paragraph and a half before oh my god, I have no command of language today. I'm sorry. Massive brain fart. Well, this is embarrassing. Before we pick up where we left off. There we go. Much better. Oh boy, getting old sucks. The second thing to go when you get old is your memory, and I cannot remember the first. All right. Where are you? I asked. My place? No. I left there when the security bands mentioned you. I'm near to Farcaster. That's where I need to be. I looked around again. Ocean, sky, a hint of clouds, at least no fleets of EMVs. All right, said Johnny's disembodied voice. "There's a powered-down force multiportal less than 10 clicks from your present location." I shielded my eyes and rotated 360 degrees. "The hell there is," I said. "I don't know how far away the horizon is on this world, but it's at least 40 clicks, and I can't see anything." "Submersible base," said Johnny. "Hang on, I'm going to take control." The Hawken mat lurched again, dipped once, and then fell steadily. I held on with both hands and resisted the urge to scream. "Submersible!" I called again against the wind rush. "How far?" "Do you mean how deep?" "Yeah." "8 fathoms." I converted the archaic units to meters. This time I did scream. "That's almost 14 meters under water!" "Where else do you expect a submersible to be?" "What the hell do you expect me to do? Hold my breath?" The ocean rushed toward me. "Not necessary," said my comlog. "The Hawking mat has a primitive crash field. It should easily hold on for a mere 8 fathoms. Please hang on." I hung on. Johnny was waiting for me when I arrived. The submersible had been dark and dank with the sweat of abandonment. The Farcaster had been of a military variety I had never seen before. It was a relief to step into sunlight and a city street with Johnny waiting. I told him what had happened with Q. We walked empty streets past old buildings. The sky was pale blue, fading toward evening. No one was in sight. "Hey," I said, stopping. "Where are we?" It was an incredibly Earth-like world, but the sky, the gravity, the texture of the place was like nothing I'd visited. Johnny smiled. "I'll let you guess. Let's walk some more." There were ruins to our left as we walked down a wide street. I stopped and stared. "That's the Colosseum," I said. "The Roman Colosseum on old Earth." I looked around at the aging buildings, the cobblestone streets, and the trees swaying slightly in a soft breeze. "This is a reconstruction of the old Earth city of Rome," I said, trying to keep the astonishment out of my voice. "New Earth?" I knew at once that it wasn't. I'd been to New Earth numerous times, and the sky tones, smells, and gravity had not been like this. Johnny shook his head. "This is nowhere in the web." I stopped walking. "That's impossible." By definition, any world which could be reached by Farcaster was in the web. "Nonetheless, it is not in the web." "Where is it, then?" "Old Earth." We walked on. Johnny pointed out another ruin. "The Forum." Descending a long staircase, he said, "Ahead is the Piazza de Spagna, where we'll spend the night." "Old Earth," I said, my first comment in 20 minutes. "Time travel?" "That is not possible, M. Lamia." "A theme park, then?" Johnny laughed. It was a pleasant laugh, unself-conscious and easy. "Perhaps. I don't really know its purpose or function. It is an analogue." "An analogue." I squinted at the red, setting sun just visible down a narrow street. "It looks like the hollows I've seen of old Earth. It feels right, even though I've never been there. It is very accurate." "Where is it? I mean, what star?" "I don't know the number," said Johnny. "It's in the Hercules cluster." I managed not to repeat what he said, but I stopped and sat down on one of the steps. With the Hawking drive, humankind had explored, colonized, and linked with Farcaster worlds across many thousands of light years. But no one had tried to reach the exploding core suns. We had barely crawled out of the cradle of one spiral arm, the Hercules cluster. "Why has the Technocore built a replica of Rome in the Hercules cluster?" I asked. Johnny sat next to me. We both looked up as a whirling mass of pigeons exploded into flight and wheeled above the rooftops. I don't know, M. Lamia. There is much that I have not learned, at least partially because I have not been interested until now. Braun, I said. Excuse me? Call me Braun. Johnny smiled and inclined his head. Thank you, Braun. One thing, though, I do not believe that it is a replica of the city of Rome alone. It is all of old Earth. I set both hands on the sun-warmed stone of the step I was sitting on. All of old Earth? All of its continents? Cities? I believe so. I haven't been out of Italy and England except for a sea voyage between the two, but I believe the analogue is complete. Why, for God's sake? Johnny nodded slowly. That may indeed be the case. Why don't we go inside and eat and talk more about this? It may relate to who tried to kill me and why. Inside was an apartment in a large house at the foot of the marble stairs. Windows looked out on what Johnny called the piazza, and I could see up the staircase to a large yellow-brown church above, and down to the square where a boat-shaped fountain tossed water into the evening stillness. Johnny said that the fountain had been designed by Bernini, but the name meant nothing to me. The rooms were small but high-ceilinged, with rough but elaborately carved furniture from an era I did not recognize. There was no sign of electricity or modern appliances. The house did not respond when I spoke to it at the door, and again in the apartment upstairs. As dusk fell over the square and the city outside the tall windows, the only lights were a few street lamps of gas or some more primitive combustible. This is out of old Earth's past, I said, touching the thick pillows. I raised my head, suddenly understanding. Keats died in Italy, early 19th or 20th century. This is then. Yes, early 19th century, 1821 to be precise. The whole world is a museum? Oh no, different areas are different eras, of course. It depends on the analogue being pursued. I don't understand. We had moved into a room cluttered with thick furniture, and I sat on an oddly carved couch by a window. A film of gold evening light still touched the spire of the tawny church up the steps. Pigeons wheeled white against blue sky. Are there millions of people, cybrids, living on this fake old Earth? I do not believe so, said Johnny. Only the number necessary for the particular analogue project. He saw that I still did not understand, and took a breath before continuing. When I awoke here, there were cybrid analogues of Joseph Seven, Dr. Clark, and the landlady Anna Angeletti, young Lieutenant Elton, and a few others. Italian shopkeepers, the owner of the trattoria across the square who used to bring us our food, passer-by, that sort of thing. No more than a score at the most. What happened to them? They were probably recycled, like the man with the queue. Queue. I suddenly stared across the darkening room at Johnny. He was a cybrid? Without doubt. The self-destruction you described is precisely the way I would rid myself of this cybrid if I had to. My mind was racing. I realized how stupid I had been, how little I had learned about anything. Then it was another AI who tried to kill you. It seems that way. Why? Johnny made a gesture with his hands. Possibly to erase some quantum of knowledge that died with my cybrid. Something I had learned only recently, and the other AI, or AIs, knew would be destroyed in my system's crash. I stood, paced back and forth, and stopped at the window. The darkness was settling in earnest now. There were lamps in the room, but Johnny made no move to light them, and I preferred the dimness. It made the unreality of what I was hearing even that much more unreal. I looked into the bedroom. The western windows admitted the last of the light. Bedclothes glowed whitely. "You died here," I said. "He did," said Johnny. "I am not he." "But you have his memories." "Have forgotten dreams. There are gaps." "But you know what he felt." "I remember what the designers thought he felt." "Tell me." "What?" Johnny's skin was very pale in the gloom. His short curls looked black. "What it was like to die, to be reborn." Johnny told me, his voice very soft, almost melodic, lapsing sometimes into an English too archaic to be understood, but far more beautiful to the ear than the hybrid tongue we speak today. He told me what it was like to be a poet obsessed with perfection, far harsher towards his own efforts than even the most vicious critic. And the critics were vicious. His work was dismissed, ridiculed, described as derivative and silly. Too poor to marry the woman he loved, loaning money to his brother in America, and thus losing the last chance of financial security. And then the brief glory of growing into the full maturation of his poetic powers, just as he fell prey to the consumption which had claimed his mother and his brother Tom. Then sent off to exile in Italy, reputedly for his health, while knowing all the while it meant a lonely, painful death at the age of 26. He talked of the agony of seeing Fanny's handwriting on the letters he found too painful to open. He talked of the loyalty of the young artist Joseph Severn, who had been chosen as a travelling companion for Keats by friends who had abandoned the poet at the end, of how Severn had nursed the dying man and stayed with him during the final days. He told of the hemorrhages in the night, of Dr. Clark bleeding him and prescribing exercise and good air, and of the ultimate religious and personal despair which had led Keats to demand his own epitaph be carved in stone as "Here lies one whose name was writ in water." Only the dimmest light from below outlined the tall windows. Johnny's voice seemed to float in the night-scented air. He spoke of awakening after his death in the bed where he died, still attended by the loyal Severn and Dr. Clark, of remembering that he was the poet John Keats, the way one remembers an identity from a fast-fading dream, while all the while knowing that he was something else. He told of the illusion continued, the trip back to England, the reunion with the Fanny who was not Fanny, and the near mental breakdown this had engendered. He told of his inability to write further poetry, of his increasing estrangement from the cybrid impostors, of his retreat resembling catatonia combined with hallucinations of his true AI existence in the nearly incomprehensible, to a 19th-century poet, technocore, and of the ultimate crumbling of the illusion and the abandonment of the Keats project. "In truth," he said, "the entire evil charade made me think of nothing so much as a passage in a letter I wrote—he wrote—to his brother George some time before his illness. Keats said, 'May there not be a superior being amused with any graceful, though instinctive attitude my mind may fall into, as I am entertained with the alertness of a stoat or the anxiety of a deer? Though a quarrel in the streets is a thing to be hated, the energies displayed in it are fine. By a superior being our reasonings may take the same tone, though erroneous they may be fine. What? Though erroneous, they may be fine. This is the very thing in which consists poetry.'" "You think the Keats project was evil?" I asked. "Anything which deceives is evil, I believe." "Perhaps you are more John Keats than you are willing to admit." "No. The absence of poetic instinct showed otherwise even in the midst of the most elaborate illusion." I looked at the dark outlines of shapes in the dark house. "Do the AIs know that we're here?" "Probably. Almost surely. There is no place that I can go that the Technocore cannot trace and follow. But it was the web authorities and brigands from whom we fled, no?" But you know that it was some intelligence in the Technocore who assaulted you. Yes, but only in the web. Such violence in the core would not be tolerated. There came a noise from the street. A pigeon, I hoped. Wind blowing trash across cobblestones, perhaps. I said, "How will the Technocore respond to my being here?" "I have no idea." "Surely it must be a secret." "It is. Something they consider irrelevant to humanity." Oh, sorry. "It is something they consider irrelevant to humanity." I shook my head, a futile gesture in the darkness. The recreation of old Earth, the resurrection of how many? Human personalities as cybrids on this recreated world. AIs killing AIs. Irrelevant. I laughed, but managed to keep the laughter under control. Jesus wept, Johnny. Almost certainly. I moved to the window, not caring what sort of target I would afford anyone in the dark street below, and fumbled out a cigarette. They were damp from the afternoon's chase through the snowdrifts, but one lighted when I struck it. "Johnny, earlier when you said that the old Earth analog was complete, I said, 'Why, for God's sake?' And you said something like, 'That may be the case.' Was that just a wise-ass comment, or did you mean something?" "I mean that it might indeed be for God's sake." "Explain." Johnny sighed in the darkness. "I don't understand the exact purpose of the Keats project or the other Earth analogues, but I suspect that it is part of a technocore project going back at least 7 standard centuries to realize the ultimate intelligence." "The ultimate intelligence," I said, exhaling smoke. Uh-huh. So the Technocore is trying to what? To build God? Yes. Why? There is no simple answer, Braun, any more than there is a simple answer to the question of why humankind has sought God in a million guises for 10,000 generations. But with the core, the interest lies more in the quest for more efficiency, more reliable ways to handle variables. But the Technocore can draw on itself and the megadatasphere of 200 worlds. And there still will be blanks in the predictive powers. I threw my cigarette out the window, for watching the ember fall into the night. The breeze was suddenly cold. I hugged my arms. How does all this old Earth, the resurrection projects, the cybrids, how does it lead to creating the ultimate intelligence? I don't know, Bron. 8 standard centuries ago, at the beginning of the first information age, a man named Norbert Wiener wrote, "Can God play a significant game with his own creature? Can any creator, even a limited one, play a significant game with his own creature?" Humanity dealt with this inconclusively with their early AIs. The core wrestles with it in the resurrection projects. Perhaps the UI program has been completed, and all of this remains a function of the ultimate creature/creator, a personality whose motives are as far beyond the core's understanding as the core's are beyond humanity. Beyond humanity's understanding. I started to move in the dark room, bumped a low table with my knee, and remained standing. "None of which tells us who is trying to kill you," I said. "No." Johnny rose and moved to the far wall. A match flared and he lighted a candle. Our shadows wavered on the walls and ceiling. Johnny came closer and softly gripped my upper arms. The soft light painted his curls and eyelashes copper, and touched his high cheekbones and firm chin. "Why are you so tough?" he asked. I stared at him. His face was only inches from mine. We were the same height. "Let go," I said. Instead, he leaned forward and kissed me. His lips were soft and warm, and the kiss seemed to last for hours. He's a machine, I thought. Human, but machine behind that. I closed my eyes. His soft hand touched my cheek, my neck, the back of my head. "Listen," I whispered when we broke apart for an instant. Johnny did not let me finish. He lifted me in his arms and carried me into the other room. The tall bed, the soft mattress and deep comforter. The candlelight from the other room flickered and danced as we undressed each other in a sudden urgency. We made love 3 times that night, each time responding to slow, sweet imperatives of touch and warmth and closeness and the escalating intensity of sensation. I remember looking down at him the second time. His eyes were closed, hair fell loosely across his forehead, the candlelight showing the flush across his pale chest, his surprisingly strong arms and hands rising to hold me in place. He had opened his eyes that second to look back at me, and I saw only the emotion and passion of that moment reflected there. Some time before dawn we slept, and, just as I turned away and drifted off, I felt the cool touch of his hand on my hip, in a movement protective and casual without being possessive. They hit us just after first light. There were 5 of them, not Lucian, but heavily muscled, all men, and they worked well together as a team. The first I heard them was when the door to the apartment was kicked open. I rolled out of bed, jumped to the side of the bedroom door, and watched them come through. Johnny sat up and shouted something as the first man leveled a stunner. Johnny had pulled on cotton shorts before going to sleep. I was nude. There are real disadvantages to fighting in the nude when one's opponents are dressed, but the greatest problem is psychological. If you can get over the sense of heightened vulnerability, the rest is easy to compensate for. The first man saw me, decided to stun Johnny anyway, and paid for the mistake. I kicked the weapon out of his hand and clubbed him down with a blow behind the left ear. 2 more men pushed into the room. This time both of them were smart enough to deal with me first. The two others leapt for Johnny. I blocked a stiff-fingered jab, parried a kick that would have done real damage, and backed away. There was a tall dresser to my left, and the top drawer came out smooth and heavy. The big man in front of me shielded his face with both arms so that the thick wood splintered, but the instinctive reaction gave me a second's opening, and I took it, putting my entire body into the kick. Number 2 man grunted and fell back against his partner. Johnny was struggling, but one of the intruders had him around the throat in a chokehold while the other pinned his legs. I came off the floor in a crouch, accepted the blow from my number 2, and leapt across the bed. The guy holding Johnny's legs went through the glass and wood of the window without a word. Someone landed on my back, and I completed the roll across the bed and floor, bringing him up against the wall. He was good. He took the blow across his shoulder and went for a nerve pinch beneath my ear. He had a second of trouble because of the extra layers of muscle there, and I got an elbow deep into his stomach and rolled away. The man choking Johnny dropped him and delivered a textbook perfect kick to my ribs. I took half the impact, feeling at least one rib go, and spun inside, attempting no elegance as I used my left hand to crush his left testicle. The man screamed and was out of it. I'd never forgotten the stunner on the floor, and neither had the last of the opposition. He scurried around to the far side of the bed, out of reach, and dropped to all fours to grab the weapon. Definitely feeling the pain from the broken rib now, I lifted the massive bed with Johnny in it and dropped it on the guy's head and shoulders. I went under the bed from my side, retrieved the stunner, and backed into an empty corner. One guy had gone out the window. We were on the second floor. The first man to enter was still lying in the doorway. The guy I'd kicked had managed to get to one knee and both elbows. From the blood on his mouth and chin, I guessed that a rib had punctured a lung. He was breathing very raggedly. The bed had crushed the skull of the other man on the floor. The guy who'd been choking Johnny was curled up near the window, holding his crotch and vomiting. I stunned him into silence and went over to the one I'd kicked and lifted him by the hair. "Who sent you?" Fuck you! He sprayed some bloody spittle in my face. Maybe later, I said. Again, who sent you? I placed 3 fingers against his side where the rib cage seemed concave, and pressed. The man screamed and went very white. When he coughed, the blood was too red against pale skin. Who sent you? I set 4 fingers against his ribs. The bishop! He tried to levitate away from my fingers. What bishop? Shrike Temple! Lucis! Don't! Please! Oh, shit! What were you going to do with him? Us. Nothing. Oh, god damn. Don't. I need a medic, please. Sure. Answer. Stun him. Bring him back to temple. Lucis, please. I can't breathe. And me? Kill you if you resisted. Okay, I said, lifting him a little higher by his hair. We're doing fine here. What did they want him for? I don't know! He screamed very loudly. I kept one eye on the doorway to the apartment. The stunner was still in my palm under a fistful of hair. I don't know, he gasped. He was hemorrhaging in earnest now. The blood dripped on my arm and left breast. How'd you get here? EMV, roof. Where'd you cast in? Don't know. I swear. Some city in the water. Car said to return there. Please. I ripped at his clothes. No comlog, no other weapons. There was a tattoo of a blue trident just above his heart. Gunda? I said. Yeah, Parvati Brotherhood. Outside the web. Probably very hard to trace. All of you? Yeah, please. Give me some help. Oh, shit. Please. He sagged, almost unconscious. I dropped him, stepped back, and sprayed the stun beam over him. Johnny was sitting up, rubbing his throat, and staring at me with a strange gaze. Get dressed, I said. We're leaving. The EMV was an old, transparent Vican Scenic with no palm locks on the ignition plate or disc key. We caught up to the Terminator before we had crossed France, and looked down on darkness that Johnny said was the Atlantic Ocean. Except for lights of the occasional floating city or drilling platform, the only illumination came from the stars and the broad swimming pool glows of the undersea colonies. Why are we taking their vehicle? Asked Johnny. I want to see where they forecast from. He said the Lucis Shrike Temple. Yeah, now we'll see. Johnny's face was barely visible as he looked down at the dark sea 20 clicks below. Do you think those men will die? One was already dead, I said. The guy with the punctured lung will need help. 2 of them will be okay. I don't know about the one who went out the window. Do you care? Yes. The violence was barbaric. Though a quarrel in the street is a thing to be hated, the energies displayed in it are fine, I quoted. They weren't cybrids, were they? I think not. So there are at least 2 groups out to get you, the AIs and the Bishop of the Shrike Temple, and we still don't know why. I do have an idea now. I swiveled in the foam recliner. The constellations above us, familiar neither from holos of old Earth skies nor from any web world I knew, cast just enough light to allow me to see Johnny's eyes. Tell me, I said. Your mention of Hyperion gave me a clue, he said. The fact that I had no knowledge of it. Its absence said that it was important. The strange case of the dog barking in the night, I said. What? Nothing. Go on. Johnny leaned closer. The only reason I would not be aware of it is that some elements of the Technocore have blocked my knowledge of it. Your cybrid. It was strange to talk to Johnny that way now. You spend most of your time in the web, don't you? Yes. Wouldn't you run across mention of Hyperion somewhere? It's in the news every once in a while, especially when the Shrike cult's topical. Perhaps I did hear. Perhaps that is why I was murdered. I lay back and looked at the stars. Let's go ask the bishop, I said. Johnny said that the lights ahead were an analog of New York City in the mid-21st century. He didn't know what resurrection project the city had been rebuilt for. I took the EMV off auto and dropped lower. Tall buildings from the phallic symbol era of urban architecture rose from the swamps and lagoons of the North American littoral. Several had lights burning. Johnny pointed to one decrepit but oddly elegant structure and said, "The Empire State Building." "Okay," I said. "Whatever it is, that's where the EMV wants us to land." "Is it safe?" I grinned at him. "Nothing in life's safe." I let the car have its head, and we dropped to a small open platform below the building's spire. We got out and stood on the cracked balcony. It was quite dark, except for the few building lights far below and the stars. A few paces away, a vague blue glow outlined a Farcaster portal, where elevator doors may once have been. "I'll go first," I said, but Johnny had already stepped through. I palmed the borrowed stunner and followed him. I'd never been in the Shrike Temple on Lucis before, but there was no doubt that we were there now. Johnny stood a few paces ahead of me, but other than him there was no one around. The place was cool and dark and cavernous, if caverns could really be that large. A frightening polychrome sculpture which hung from invisible cables rotated to unfelt breezes. Johnny and I both turned as the Farcaster portal winked out of existence. "Well, we did their work for 'em, didn't we?" I whispered to Johnny. Even the whisper seemed to echo in the red-lit hall. I hadn't planned on Johnny casting to the temple with me. The lights seemed to come up then, not really illuminating the great hall, but widening its scope so that we could see the semicircle of men there. I remembered that some were called exorcists and others lectors, and there was some other category I forgot. Whoever they were, it was alarming to see them standing there, at least 24 of them, their robes variations on red and black, and their high foreheads glowing from the red light above. I had no trouble recognizing the bishop. He was from my world, although shorter and fatter than most of us, and his robe was very red. I did not try to hide the stunner. It was possible that if they all tried to rush us, I could bring them all down. Possible, but not probable. I could not see any weapons, but their robes could have hidden entire arsenals. Johnny walked toward the bishop, and I followed. 10 paces from the man, we stopped. The bishop was the only one not standing. His chair was made of wood, and looked as if it could be folded so that the intricate arms, supports, back, and legs could be carried in a compact form. One couldn't say the same for the mass of muscle and fat evident under the bishop's robes. Johnny took another step forward. "Why did you try to kidnap my Cybrid?" He spoke to the Shrike cult holy man as if the rest of us were not there. The bishop chuckled and shook his head. "My dear entity, it is true that we wished your presence in our place of worship, but you have no evidence that we were involved in any attempt to kidnap you." "I'm not interested in evidence," said Johnny. "I'm curious as to why you want me here." I heard a rustling behind us, and I swiveled quickly. The stunner charged and pointed, but the broad circle of Shrike priests remained motionless. Most were out of the stunner's range. I wished that I had brought my father's projectile weapon with me. The bishop's voice was deep and textured, and seemed to fill the huge space. "Surely you know that the Church of the Final Atonement has a deep and abiding interest in the world of Hyperion?" "Yes." And surely you are aware that during the past several centuries, the persona of the old Earth poet Keats has been woven into the cultural mythos of the Hyperion colony? Yes, so? The bishop rubbed his cheek with a large red ring on one finger. So, when you offered to go on the Shrike pilgrimage, we agreed. We were distressed when you reneged on this offer. Johnny's look of amazement was most human. I offered? When? 8 local days ago, said the bishop, in this room. You approached us with the idea. Did I say why I wanted to go on the Shrike pilgrimage? You said that it was, I believe the phrase you used was, important for your education. We can show you the recording, if you wish. All such conversations in the temple are recorded. Or you may have a duplicate of the recording to view at your own convenience. Yes, said Johnny. The bishop nodded, and an acolyte, or whatever the hell he was, disappeared into the gloom for a moment, and returned with a standard video chip in his hand. The bishop nodded again, and the black-robed man came forward and handed the chip to Johnny. I kept the stunner ready until the guy had returned to the semicircle of watchers. Why did you send the goondas after us? I asked. It was the first time I'd spoken in front of the bishop, and my voice sounded too loud and too raw. The Shrike holy man made a gesture with one pudgy hand. M. Keats had expressed an interest in joining our holiest pilgrimage. Since it is our belief that the final atonement is drawing closer each day, it is of no little importance to us. Consequently, our agents reported that M. Keats may have been the victim of one or more assaults, and that a certain private investigator, you, M. Lamia, was responsible for destroying the cybrid bodyguard provided M. Keats by the Technocore. Bodyguard? It was my turn to sound amazed. Of course, said the bishop. He turned toward Johnny. The gentleman with the queue who was recently murdered on the Templar excursion, was this not the same man whom you introduced as your bodyguard a week earlier? He is visible in the recording. Johnny said nothing. He seemed to be straining to remember something. At any rate, continued the bishop, we must have your answers about the pilgrimage before the week is out. The Sequoia sempervirens departs from the web in 9 local days. But that's a Templar tree ship, said Johnny. They don't make the long leap to Hyperion. The bishop smiled. In this case, it does. We have reason to believe that this may be the last church-sponsored pilgrimage, and we have chartered the Templar craft to allow as many of the faithful as possible to make the trip. The bishop gestured, and the red and black robed men faded into darkness. 2 exorcists came forward to fold his stool as the bishop stood. Please give your answer as soon as possible. He was gone. The remaining exorcists stayed to show us out. There were no more Farcasters. We exited by the main door of the temple and stood on the top step of the long staircase, looking down on the concourse mall of Hive Center and breathing in the cool, oil-scented air. My father's automatic was in the drawer where I'd left it. I made sure there was a full load of flechettes, palmed the magazine back in, and carried the weapon into the kitchen where breakfast was cooking. Johnny sat at the long table, staring down through gray windows at the loading dock. I carried the omelets over and set one in front of him. He looked up as I poured the coffee. Do you believe him? I asked. That it was your idea? You saw the video recording? Recordings can be faked. Yes, but this one wasn't. Then why did you volunteer to go on this pilgrimage? And why did your bodyguard try to kill you after you talked to the Shrike Church and the Templar captain? Johnny tried the omelet, nodded, and took another forkful. bodyguard is a complete unknown to me. He must have been assigned to me during the week lost to memory. His real purpose, obviously, was to make sure that I did not discover something, or if I did stumble upon it, to eliminate me. Something in the web or in datum plane? In the web, I presume. We need to know who it, worked for, and why they assigned him to you. I do know, said Johnny. I just asked. The Corps responds that I requested a bodyguard. The cybrid was controlled by an AI nexus which corresponds to a security force. Ask why it tried to kill you. I did. They emphatically deny that such a thing is possible. Then why was this so-called bodyguard slinking around after you a week after the murder? They respond that while I did not request security again after my discontinuity, the Corps authorities felt that it would be prudent to provide protection. I laughed. Some protection? Why the hell did he run on the Templar world when I caught up to him? They aren't even trying to give you a plausible story, Johnny. No. Nor did the bishop explain how the Shrike Church had Farcaster access to Old Earth, or whatever you call that stage-set world. And we did not ask. I didn't ask because I wanted to get out of that damn temple in one piece. Johnny didn't seem to hear. He was sipping his coffee, his gaze focused somewhere else. What? I said. He turned to look at me, tapping his thumbnail on his lower lip. There is a paradox here, Braun. What? If it was truly my aim to go to Hyperion, for my cybrid to travel there, I could not have remained in the Technocore. I would have had to invest all consciousness in the cybrid itself. Why? But even as I asked, I saw the reason. Think. Datum plane itself is an abstract, a commingling of computer and AI-generated dataspheres, and the quasi-perceptual Gibsonian matrix, designed originally for human operators, now accepted as common ground for man, machine, and AI. But AI hardware exists somewhere in real space, I said. Somewhere in the Technocore. Yes, but that is irrelevant to the function of AI consciousness, said Johnny. I can be anywhere the overlapping dataspheres allow me to travel. All of the web worlds, of course, datum plane, all of the web worlds, of course, datum plane, and any of the technocore constructs such as Old Earth. But it's only within that milieu that I can claim consciousness, or operate sensors or remotes such as this cybrid. I set my coffee cup down and stared at the thing I had loved as a man during the night just past. Yes? The colony worlds have limited dataspheres, said Johnny. While there is some contact with the Technocore via fatline transmissions, it is an exchange of data only, rather like the first information age computer interfaces, rather than a flow of consciousness. Hyperion's datasphere is primitive to the point of non-existence, and from what I can access, the core has no contact whatsoever with that world. Would that be normal? I asked. I mean, with a colony world that far away. No, the core has contact with every colony world, with such interstellar barbarians as the Ousters, and with other sources the hegemony could not imagine. I sat stunned. With the Ousters? Since the war on Brescia a few years earlier, the Ousters had been the web's prime boogeymen. The idea of the core, the same congregation of AIs which advises the Senate and the All Thing, and which allow our entire economy, Farcaster system, and technological civilization to run, the idea of the core being in touch with the Ousters was frightening. And what the hell did Johnny mean by other sources? I didn't really want to know right then. But you said it is possible for your cybrid to travel there? I said. What did you mean by investing all consciousness in your cybrid? Can an AI become human? Can you exist only in your cybrid? It has been done, Johnny said softly. Once. A personality reconstruction not too different from my own. A 20th century poet named Ezra Pound. He abandoned his AI persona and fled from the web in his cybrid. But the Pound reconstruction was insane. Or sane, I said. Yes. So all of the data and personality of an AI can survive in a cybrid's organic brain. Of course not, Braun. Not 1% of 1% of my total consciousness would survive the transition. Organic brains can't process even the most primitive information the way we can. The resultant personality would not be the AI persona. Neither would it be a truly human consciousness or cybrid. Johnny stopped in mid-sentence and turned quickly to look out the window. After a long minute, I said, "What is it?" I reached out a hand, but did not touch him. He spoke without turning. "Perhaps I was wrong to say that the consciousness would not be human," he whispered. "It is possible that the resulting persona could be human touched with a certain divine madness and metahuman perspective. It could be, if purged of all memory of our age, of all consciousness of the core, it could be the person the cybrid was programmed to be." "John Keats," I said. Johnny turned away from the window and closed his eyes. His voice was hoarse with emotion. It was the first time I had heard him recite poetry. "Fanatics have their dreams, wherewith they weave a paradise for a sect. The savage, too, from forth the loftiest fashion of his sleep, guesses at heaven. Pity these have not traced upon vellum or wild Indian leaf the shadows of melodious utterance. But bare of laurel they live, dream, and die. For Poesy alone can tell her dreams, with the fine spell of words alone can save Imagination from the sable charm, and dumb enchantment. Who alive can say, thou art no poet, mayst not tell thy dreams? Since every man whose soul is not a clod hath visions, and would speak, if he had loved, and been well nurtured in his mother tongue. Whether the dream now purposed to rehearse be poets or fanatics will be known, when this warm scribe my hand is in the grave." "I don't get it," I said. "What does it mean?" "It means," said Johnny, smiling carefully, "that I know what decision I made, and why I made it. I wanted to cease being a cybrid and become a man. I wanted to go to Hyperion. I still do." "Somebody killed you for that decision a week ago," I said. "Yes." "And you're going to try again?" "Yes." "Why not invest consciousness in your cybrid here? Become human in the web?" "It would never work," said Johnny. "What you see as a complex interstellar society is only a small part of the core reality matrix. I would be constantly confronted with and at the mercy of the AIs. The Keats persona, reality, would never survive." "All right," I said. "You need to get out of the web. But there are other colonies. Why Hyperion?" Johnny took my hand. His fingers were long and warm and strong. "Don't you see, Braun? There is some connection here. It may well be that Keats's dreams of Hyperion were some sort of trans-temporal communication between his then persona and his now persona. If nothing else, Hyperion is the key mystery of our age, physical and poetic, and it is quite probable that I was born, died, and was born again to explore it." "It sounds like madness to me," I said. "Delusions of grandeur." "Almost certainly," laughed Johnny. "And I have never have been this happy. And I have never been happier. And I never have been happier. There we go. And I never have been happier." He grabbed my arms and brought me to my feet, his arms around me. "Will you go with me, Braun? Go with me to Hyperion." I blinked in surprise, both at his question and the answer, which filled me like a rush of warmth. "Yes," I said, "I'll go." We went into the sleeping area then, and made love the rest of that day, sleeping finally to awaken to the low light of Shift 3 in the industrial trench outside. Johnny was lying on his back, his hazel eyes open and staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. But not so lost he did not smile and put his arm around me. I nestled my cheek against him, settling into the small curve where shoulder meets chest, and went back to sleep. Oh, thanks for tuning in, A Optical Antenna and Warren Steele. Hope you feel better, Warren. Resting usually helps, at least for me. I was wearing my best clothes, a suit of black whipcord, a blouse woven of Renaissance silk with a carved bloodstone at the throat, a cocked Yulin Bray tricorn, when Johnny and I forecast to TC squared the next day. I left him in the wood and brass bar near the central terminex, but not before I slid Dad's automatic across to him in the paper bag and told him to shoot anyone who even looked cross-eyed at him. "Web English is such a subtle tongue," he said. "That phrase is older than the web," I said. "Just do it." I squeezed his hand and left without looking back. I took a skycab to the administration complex and walked my way through about 9 security checks before they let me into the center grounds. I walked the half-click across Deer Park, admiring the swans in the nearby lake and the white buildings on the hilltop in the distance, and there were 9 more checkpoints before a center security woman led me up the flagstone path to Government House, a low, graceful building set amid flower gardens and landscaped hills. There was an elegantly furnished waiting room, but I barely had time to sit down on an authentic pre-Hegira de Kooning before an aide appeared and ushered me into the CEO's private office. Mina Gladstone came around the desk to shake my hand and show me to a chair. It was strange to see her in person again after all those years of watching her on HTV. She was even more impressive in the flesh. Her hair was cut short, but seemed to be blowing back in gray-white waves. Her cheeks and chin were as sharp and Lincolnesque as all the history-prone pundits insisted. But it was the large, sad brown eyes which dominated the face and made one feel as if he or she were in the presence of a truly original person. I found that my mouth was dry. "Thank you for seeing me, Executive. I know how busy you are."
I'm never too busy to see you, Braun, just as your father was never too busy to see me when I was a junior senator.
I nodded. Dad had once described Mina Gladstone as the only political genius in the hegemony. He knew that she would be CEO someday, despite her late start in politics. I wished Dad had lived to see it.
How is your mother, Braun?
She's well, Executive. She rarely leaves our old summer place on Freeholm any more, but I see her every Christmas fest. Gladstone nodded. She had been sitting casually on the edge of a massive desk which the tabloids said had once belonged to an assassinated president, not Lincoln, of the pre-mistake USA. But now she smiled and went around to the simple chair behind it.
I miss your father, Braun. I wish he were in this administration. Did you see the lake when you came in?
Yes.
Do you remember sailing toy boats there with my Creston when you were both toddlers?
Just barely, Executive. I was pretty young. Mina Gladstone smiled. An intercom chimed, but she waved it into silence.
How can I help you, Braun?
I took a breath. Executive, you may be aware that I'm working as an independent private investigator. I didn't wait for her to nod. A case I've been working on recently has led me back to Dad's suicide.
Braun, you know that was investigated most thoroughly. I saw the Commission's report.
Yeah, I said, I did too. But recently I've discovered some very strange things about the Technocore and its attitude toward the world Hyperion. Weren't you and Dad working on a bill that would have brought Hyperion into the hegemony protectorate?
Gladstone nodded. Yes, Braun, but there were over a dozen other colonies being considered that year. None were allowed in.
Right. But did the Corps or the AI Advisory Council take a special interest in Hyperion? The CEO tapped a stylus against her lower lip.
What kind of information do you have, Braun?
I started to answer, but she held up a blunt finger.
Wait.
She keyed an interactive.
Thomas, I'll be stepping out for a few minutes. Please be sure that the Sol Draconi trade delegation is entertained if I fall a bit behind schedule.
I didn't see her key anything else, but suddenly a blue and gold Farcaster portal hummed into life near the far wall. She gestured me to go through first. A plain of gold, knee-high grass stretched to horizons which seemed farther away than most. The sky was a pale yellow with burnished copper streaks, which may have been clouds. I didn't recognize the world. Mina Gladstone stepped through and touched the Comlog design on her sleeve. The Farcaster portal winked out. A warm breeze blew spice scents to us. Gladstone touched her sleeve again, glanced skyward, and nodded.
I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Braun. Castrop Roselle has no datasphere or sats of any kind. Now please go ahead with what you were saying. What kind of information have you come across?
I looked around at the empty grasslands. Nothing to warrant this security. Probably. I've just discovered that the Technocore seems very interested in Hyperion. They've also built some sort of analog to old Earth. An entire world. If I expected shock or surprise, I was disappointed. Gladstone nodded.
Yes, we know about the old Earth analog.
I was shocked. Then why hasn't it ever been announced? If the Corps can rebuild old Earth, a lot of people would be interested. Gladstone began walking, and I strolled with her, walking faster to keep up with her long-legged strides.
Braun, it would not be in the hegemony's interest to announce such a thing. Our best human intelligence sources have no idea why the Corps is doing such a thing. They have offered no insight. The best policy now is to wait. What information do you have about Hyperion?
I had no idea whether I could trust Mina Gladstone, old times or not, but I knew that if I was going to get information, I would have to give some. They built an analog reconstruction of an old Earth poet, I said, and they seemed obsessed with keeping any information about Hyperion away from him. Gladstone picked a long stem of grass and sucked on it.
The John Keats hybrid.
Yes, I was careful not to show surprise this time. I know that Dad was pushing hard to get protectorate status for Hyperion. If the Corps had some special interest in the place, they may have had something to do, may have manipulated.
His apparent suicide?
Yeah. The wind moved gold grass in waves. Something very small scurried away in the stalks at our feet.
It is not beyond the realm of possibility, Braun, but there was absolutely no evidence. Tell me what this hybrid is going to do.
First, tell me why the Corps is so interested in Hyperion. The older woman spread her hands.
If we knew that, Braun, I would sleep much easier nights. As far as we know, the Technocore has been obsessed with Hyperion for centuries. When CEO Yevshensky allowed King Billy of Asquith to recolonize the planet, it almost precipitated a true secession of AIs from the web. Recently, the establishment of our Fat Line transmitter there brought about a similar crisis.
But the AIs didn't secede.
No, Braun, it appears that, for whatever reason, they need us almost as badly as we need them.
But if they're so interested in Hyperion, why don't they allow it into the web so they can get there themselves? Gladstone ran a hand through her hair. The bronze clouds far above rippled in what must be a fantastic jet stream.
They are adamant about Hyperion not being admitted to the web, she said. It is an interesting paradox. Tell me what the Cybrid is going to do.
First, tell me why the Corps is obsessed with Hyperion.
We do not know for sure. Best guess, then. CEO Gladstone removed the stem of grass from her mouth and regarded it. We believe that the Corps is embarked on a truly incredible project which would allow them to predict everything, to handle every variable of space, time, and history as a quantum of manageable information. The ultimate intelligence project, I said, knowing that I was being careless and not caring. This time, CEO Gladstone did register shock. How do you know about that? What does that project have to do with Hyperion? Gladstone sighed. We don't know for sure, Braun, but we do know that there is an anomaly on Hyperion which they have not been able to factor into their predictive analyses. Do you know about the so-called time tombs that the Shrike Church holds holy? Sure, they've been off limits to tourists for a while. Yes, because of an accident to a researcher there a few decades ago, our scientists have confirmed that the anti-entropic fields around the tombs are not merely a protection against time's erosive effects, as has been widely believed. What are they? The remnants of a field, or force, which has actually propelled the tombs and their contents backward in time from some distant future. Contents? I managed. But the tombs are empty, ever since they were discovered. Empty now, said Mina Gladstone. But there is evidence that they were full, will be full, when they open, in our near future. I stared at her. How near? Her dark eyes remained soft, but the movement of her head was final. I've told you too much already, Braun. You are forbidden to repeat it. We'll ensure that silence, if necessary. I hid my own confusion by finding a piece of grass to strip for chewing. All right, I said. What's going to come out of the tombs? Aliens? Bombs? Some sort of reverse time capsules? Gladstone smiled tightly. If we knew that, Braun, we would be ahead of the Corps, and we are not. The smile disappeared. One hypothesis is that the tombs relate to some future war, a settling of future scores by rearranging the past, perhaps. A war between who, for Christ's sakes? She opened her hands again. We need to be getting back, Braun. Would you please tell me what the Keats Cybrid is going to do now? I looked down and then back up to meet her steady gaze. I couldn't trust anyone, but the Corps and the Shrike Church already knew Johnny's plans. If this was a three-sided game, perhaps each side should know, in case there was a good guy in the bunch. He's going to invest all consciousness in the Cybrid, I said rather clumsily. He's going to become human, M. Gladstone, and then go to Hyperion. I'm going with him. The CEO of the Senate and all thing, chief officer for a government which spanned almost 200 worlds and billions of people, stared at me in silence for a long moment. Then she said, He plans to go with the Templar ship on the pilgrimage, then. Yes. No, said Mina Gladstone. What do you mean? I mean that the Sequoia Sempervirens will not be allowed to leave hegemony space. There will be no pilgrimage unless the Senate decides it is in our interest. Her voice was iron hard. Johnny and I'll go by spinship, I said. The pilgrimage is a loser's game anyway. No, she said. There will be no more civilian spinships to Hyperion for some time. The word civilian tipped me. War? Gladstone's lips were tight. She nodded. Before most spinships could reach the region. A war with the ousters? Initially. View it as a way to force the issue between the Technocore and ourselves, Braun. We will either have to incorporate the Hyperion system into the web to allow it force protection, or it will fall to a race which despises and distrusts the Corps and all AIs. I didn't mention Johnny's comment that the Corps had been in touch with the ousters. I said, a way to force the issue. Fine, but who manipulated the ousters into attacking?
Gladstone looked at me. If her face was Lincoln-esque at that moment, then old Earth's Lincoln was one tough son of a bitch.
It's time to get back, Braun. You appreciate how important it is that none of this information gets out.
I appreciate the fact that you wouldn't have told me unless you had a reason to, I said. I don't know who you want the stuff to go to, but I know I'm a messenger, not a confidant.
Don't underestimate our resolve to keep this classified, Braun.
I laughed. Lady, I wouldn't underestimate your resolve in anything. Mina Gladstone gestured for me to step through the Farcaster portal first. I know a way we can discover what the core is up to, said Johnny as we rowed alone in a rented jet boat on Mare Infinitus. But it would be dangerous. So what else is new? I'm serious. We should only attempt it if we feel that it is imperative to understand what the core fears from Hyperion. I do. We will need an operative, someone who is an artist in datum plane operations, someone smart but not so smart that they won't take a chance, and someone who would risk everything and keep the secret just for the ultimate in cyberpuke pranks. I grinned at Johnny. I've got just the man. BB lived alone in a cheap apartment at the base of a cheap tower in a cheap TC squared neighborhood. But there was nothing cheap about the hardware that filled most of the space in the four-room flat. Most of BB's salary for the past standard decade had gone into state-of-the-art cyberpuke toys. I started by saying that we wanted him to do something illegal. BB said that, as a public employee, he couldn't consider such a thing. He asked what the thing was. Johnny began to explain. BB leaned forward and I saw the old cyberpuke gleam in his eyes from our college days. I half expected him to try to dissect Johnny right there, just to see how a cybrid worked. Then Johnny got to the interesting part, and BB's gleam turned into a sort of green glow. When I self-destruct my AI persona, said Johnny, the shift to cybrid consciousness will take only nanoseconds, but during that time my section of the core perimeter defenses will drop. The security phages will fill the gap before too many more nanoseconds pass, but during that time... Entry to the core, whispered BB, his eyes glowing like some antique VDT. It would be very dangerous, stressed Johnny. To my knowledge, no human operator has ever penetrated core periphery. BB rubbed his upper lip.
There's a legend that Cowboy Gibson did it before the core seceded, he mumbled. But nobody believes it, and Cowboy disappeared.
Even if you penetrate, said Johnny, there would be insufficient time to access, except for the fact that I have the data coordinates.
Fan-fucking-tastic, whispered BB.
He turned back to his console and reached for his shunt.
Let's do it.
Now? I said. Even Johnny looked taken aback.
Why wait?
BB clicked in his shunt and attached metacortex leads, but left the deck idling.
Are we doing this or what?
I went over next to Johnny on the couch and took his hand. His skin was cool. He showed no expression now, but I could imagine what it must be like to be facing imminent destruction of one's personality and previous existence. Even if the transfer worked, the human with the John Keats persona would not be Johnny. He's right, said Johnny. Why wait? I kissed him. All right, I said. I'm going in with BB. No! Johnny squeezed my hand. You can't help, and the danger would be terrible. I heard my own voice, as implacable as Mina Gladstone's. Perhaps, but I can't ask BB to do this if I won't, and I won't leave you in there alone.
I squeezed his hand a final time and went over to sit by BB at the console. How do I connect with this fucking thing, BB? You've read all the cyberpuke stuff. You know all about the terrible beauty of the datum plane, the three-dimensional highways with their landscapes of black ice and neon perimeters and day-glow strange loops and shimmering skyscrapers of data blocks under hovering clouds of AI presence. I saw all of it riding piggyback on BB's carrier wave. It was almost too much, too intense, too terrifying. I could hear the black threats of the Hulkin security phages. I could smell death on the breath of the counterthrust tapeworm viruses, even through the ice screens. I could feel the weight of the AI's wrath above us. We were insects under elephants' feet, and we hadn't even done anything yet except travel approved dataways on a logged in access errand BB had dreamed up, some homework stuff for his flow control records and statistics job. And I was wearing stick on leads, seeing things in a datum plane version of fuzzy black and white TV, while Johnny and BB were viewing full stim sim holo, as it were. I don't know how they took it. Okay, whispered BB in some datum plane equivalent of a whisper. We're here. Where? All I saw was an infinite maze of bright lights and even brighter shadows. 10,000 cities arrayed in 4 dimensions. Core periphery, whispered BB. Hang on, it's about time. I had no arms to hang on to, and nothing physical in this universe to grasp, but I concentrated on the waveform shades that were our data truck and clung. Johnny died then. I've seen a nuclear explosion firsthand. When Dad was a senator, he took Mom and me to Olympus Command School to see a force demonstration. For the last course, the audience viewing pod was forecast to some godforsaken world, Armagast, I think, and a force ground recon platoon fired a clean tactical nuke at a pretend adversary some 9 clicks away. The viewing pod was shielded with a Class 10 containment field, polarized, the nuke only a 50-kiloton field tactical, but I'll never forget the blast, the shockwave rocking the 80-ton pod like a leaf on its repellers, the physical shock of light so obscenely bright that it polarized our field to midnight and still brought tears to our eyes and clamored to get in. This was worse. A section of the datum plane seemed to flash and then to implode on itself. Reality flushed down a drain of pure black. Hang on! BB screamed against datum plane static that rasped at my bones, and we were whirling, tumbling, sucked into the vacuum like insects in an oceanic vortex. Somehow, incredibly, impossibly, black armored phages thrust toward us through the din and madness. BB avoided one, turned the other's acid membranes against itself. We were being sucked into something colder and blacker than any void in our reality could ever be. There! Called BB, his voice analog almost lost in the tornado rush of ripping datasphere. There what? Then I saw it, a thin line of yellow rippling in the turbulence like a cloth banner in a hurricane. BB rolled us, found our own wave to carry us against the storm, matched coordinates that danced past me too quickly to see, and we were riding the yellow band into what? Frozen fountains of fireworks, transparent mountain ranges of data, endless glaciers of ROM-works, access ganglia spreading like fissures, iron clouds of semi-sentient internal process bubbles, glowing pyramids of primary source stuff, each guarded by lakes of black ice and armies of black pulse phages. Shit, I whispered to no one in particular. BB followed the yellow band down, in, through. I felt a connection, as if someone had suddenly given us a great mass to carry. "Got it!" screamed BB, and suddenly there was a sound louder and larger than the maelstrom of noise surrounding and consuming us. It was neither klaxon nor siren, but it was both in its tone of warning and aggression. We were climbing out of it all. I could see a vague wall of gray through the brilliant chaos, and somehow knew it to be the periphery, the vacuum dwindling but still breaching the wall like a shrinking black stain. We were climbing out. But not quickly enough. The phages hit us from 5 sides. During the 12 years I've been an investigator, I've been shot once, knifed twice. I've had more than this one rib broken. This hurt more than all combined. BB was fighting and climbing at the same time. My contribution to the emergency was to scream. I felt cold claws on us, pulling us down, back into the brightness and noise and chaos. BB was using some program, some formula of enchantment to fight them off. But not enough. I could feel the blows slamming home, not against me primarily, but connecting to the matrix analog that was BB. We were sinking back. Inexorable forces had us in tow. Suddenly I felt Johnny's presence, and it was as if a huge, strong hand had scooped us up, lifted us through the periphery wall an instant before the stain snapped our lifeline to existence, and the defensive field crashed together like steel teeth. We moved at impossible speed down congested dataways, passing datum plane couriers and other operator analogs like an EMV ripping past off and other operator analogs like an EMV ripping past aux carts. Then we were approaching a slow time gate, leapfrogging gridlocked exiting operator analogs in some four-dimensional high jump. I felt the inevitable nausea of transition as we came up out of the matrix. Light burned my retinas. Real light. Then the pain washed in, and I slumped over the console and groaned. "Come on, Braun." It was Johnny, or someone just like Johnny, helping me to my feet and moving us both toward the door. "BB!" I gasped. No. I opened aching eyes long enough to see BB Serbringer draped across his console. His Stetson had fallen off and rolled to the floor. BB's head had exploded, spattering most of the console with gray and red. His mouth was open, and a thick white foam still issued from it. It looked like his eyes had melted. Johnny caught me, half lifted me. "We have to go," he whispered. "Someone will be here any minute." I closed my eyes and let him take me away from there. We were in a low space, more cave than room, with cables snaking from a shattered ceiling, and pools of water on the slime-caked tiles. The red light came from somewhere beyond the cave, a maintenance access shaft, perhaps, or automech tunnel. I moaned softly. Johnny was there, moving from the rough bedroll of blankets to my... Jeez Louise. Mm. My diaphragm just giving me a quick wobble there. Johnny was there. Johnny was there, moving from the rough bedroll of blankets to my side. His face was darkened with grease or dirt, and there was at least one fresh cut. "Where are we?" He touched my cheek. My cheek. His other arm went around my shoulders and helped me to a sitting position. The awful view shifted and tilted, and for a moment I thought I was going to be sick. Johnny helped me drink water from a plastic tumbler. "Dregg's Hive," said Johnny.
I'd guessed even before I was fully conscious. Dreg's Hive is the deepest pit on Lucis, a no-man's land of mech tunnels and illegal burrows, occupied by half the web's outcasts and outlaws. It was in Dreg's Hive that I'd been shot several years ago, and still bore the laser scar above my left hip bone. I held the tumbler out for more water. Johnny fetched some from a steel therm and came back. I panicked for a second as I fumbled in my tunic pocket and on my belt. Dad's automatic was gone. Johnny held the weapon up, and I relaxed, accepting the cup and drinking thirstily. "BB," I said, hoping for a moment that it had all been a terrible hallucination. Johnny shook his head. "There were defenses that neither of us had anticipated. BB's incursion was brilliant, but he couldn't outfight core omegaphages. But half of the operators in Datum Plane felt echoes of the battle. BB is already the stuff of legend." "Fucking great," I said, and gave a laugh that sounded suspiciously like the beginning of a sob. "The stuff of legend. And BB's dead. For fuck all nothing." Johnny's arm was tight around me. "Not for nothing, Braun. He made the grab, and passed the data to me before he died." I managed to sit fully upright and to look at Johnny. He seemed the same soft eyes, same hair, same voice. But something was subtly different, deeper, more human. "You?" I said. "Did you make the transfer? Are you human?" John Keats smiled at me. "Yes, Braun, or as close to human as someone forged in the core could ever be." "But you remember me, BB. What's happened?" "Yes, and I remember first looking into Chapman's Homer, and my brother Tom's eyes as he hemorrhaged into the night, and Seven's kind voice when I was too weak to open my own eyes to face my fate, and our night in Piazza di Spagna, when I touched your lips and imagined Fanny's cheek against mine. I remember, Bron." For a second I was confused and then hurt. But then he set his palm against my cheek, and he touched me, and there was no one else, and I understood. I closed my eyes. "Why are we here?" I whispered against his shirt. "I couldn't risk using a Farcaster. The Corps could trace us at once. I considered the spaceport, but you were in no condition to travel. I chose the dregs." I nodded against him. "They'll try to kill you." "Yes." "And the local cops after us? The hegemony police? Transit cops?" "No, I don't think so. The only ones who've challenged us so far were two bands of Goondas and some of the dregs' dwellers." I opened my eyes. What happened to the Goondas? There were more deadly hoodlums and contract killers in the web, but I'd never run across any. There were more deadly hoodlums and contract killers in the web, but I'd never run across any. Johnny held up Dad's automatic and smiled. "I don't remember anything after BB," I said. "You were injured in the phage backlash. You could walk, but we were the cause of more than a few odd looks in the concourse." "I bet. Tell me about what BB discovered. Why is the Corps obsessed with Hyperion?" "Eat first," said Johnny. "It's been more than 28 hours." He crossed the dripping width of the cave room and returned with a self-heating packet. It was basic holo-fanatic fare, flash-dried and reheated cloned beef, potatoes which had never seen soil, and carrots which looked like some sort of deep-sea slugs. Nothing had ever tasted so good. "Okay," I said. "Tell me." "The Technocorps has been divided into three groups for as long as the Corps has existed," said Johnny.
The stables are the old line AIs, some of them dating back to pre-mistake days. At least one of them gained sentience in the first information age. The stables argue that a certain level of symbiosis is necessary between humanity and the core. They've promoted the Ultimate Intelligence Project as a way to avoid rash decisions, to delay until all variables can be factored. The volatiles are the force behind the secession 3 years ago. The volatiles have done conclusive studies that show how humankind's usefulness is past, and from this point on, human beings constitute a threat to the core. They advocate immediate and total extinction. Extinction, I said. After a moment, I asked, can they do it? Of the humans in the web, yes, said Johnny. Core intelligences not only create the infrastructure for hegemony society, but are necessary for everything from force deployment to the fail-safes on stockpiled nuclear and plasma arsenals. Did you know about this when you were in the core? No, said Johnny. As a pseudo-poet cybrid retrieval As a pseudo-poet cybrid retrieval project, I was a freak, a pet, a partial thing allowed to roam the web as the way a pet is let out of the house each day. I had no idea there were 3 camps of AI influence. 3 camps, I said. What's the third? And where does Hyperion come in? Between the stables and the volatiles and the ultimates. For the past 5 centuries, the Ultimates have been obsessed with the UI project. The existence or extinction of the human race is of interest to them only in how it applies to the project. To this date, they have been a force for moderation, an ally of the stables, because it is their perception that such reconstruction and retrieval projects as the old Earth experiment are necessary to the culmination of the UI. Recently, however, the Hyperion issue has caused the Ultimates to move toward the Volatile's views. Since Hyperion was explored 4 centuries ago, the core has been concerned and nonplussed. It was immediately obvious that the so-called time tombs were artifacts launched backward in time from a point at least 10,000 years in the galaxy's future. More disturbing, however, is the fact that the core predictive formulae have never been able to factor the Hyperion variable. Braun, to understand this, you must realize how much the core relies upon prediction. Already, without UI input, the core knows the details of the physical, human, and AI future to a margin of 98.9995% for a period of at least 2 centuries. The AI Advisory Council to the All Thing, with its vague Delphic utterances, considered so indispensable by humans, is a joke. The core drops tidbits of revelations to the hegemony when it serves the core's purposes, sometimes to aid the volatiles, sometimes the stables, but always to please the ultimates. Hyperion is a rent in the entire predictive fabric of the core's existence. It is the penultimate oxymoron, a non-factorable variable. Impossible as it seems, Hyperion appears to be exempt from the laws of physics, history, human psychology, and AI prediction as practiced by the core. The result has been 2 futures, 2 realities, if you will. One in which the Shrike Scourge, soon to be released on the web and interstellar humanity, is a weapon from the core-dominated future, a retroactive first strike from the volatiles who rule the galaxy millennia hence. The other reality sees the Shrike invasion, the coming interstellar war, and the other products of the Time Tomb's opening as a human fist struck back through time, a final twilight effort by the ousters, ex-colonials, and other small bands of humans who escaped the volatile's extinction programs.
Water dripped on tile. Somewhere in the tunnels nearby, a mech cauterizer's warning siren echoed from ceramic and stone. I leaned against the wall and stared at Johnny. Interstellar war, I said. Both scenarios demand an interstellar war. Yes, there is no escaping that. Can both core groups be wrong in their prediction? No. What happens on Hyperion is problematic. I lost my place. What happens on Hyperion is problematic, but the disruption in the web and elsewhere is quite clear. The Ultimates use this knowledge as the prime argument for hurrying the next step in core evolution. And what did BB's stolen data show about us, Johnny? Johnny smiled, touched my hand, but did not hold it. It showed that I am somehow part of the Hyperion unknown. Their creation of a Keats cybrid was a terrible gamble. Only my apparent lack of success as a Keats analog allowed the stables to preserve me. When I made up my mind to go to Hyperion, the volatiles killed me with the clear intention of obliterating my AI existence if my cybrid again made that decision. You did? What happened? They failed. In the core's limitless arrogance, they failed to take two things into account. First, that I might invest all consciousness in my cybrid, and thus change the nature of the Keats analog. Second, that I would go to you. Me? He took my hand. Yes, Braun, it seems that you also are part of the Hyperion unknown. I shook my head. Realizing that there was a numbness in my scalp above and behind my left ear, I raised my hand, half expecting to find damage from the datum plane fight. Instead, my fingers encountered the plastic of a neural shunt socket. I jerked my other hand from Johnny's grasp and stared at him in horror. He'd had me wired while I was unconscious. Johnny held up both hands, palms towards me. I had to, Braun. It may be necessary for the survival of both of us. I made a fist. You fucking low-life son of a bitch. Why do I need to interface directly, you lying bastard? Not with the core, Johnny said softly. With me. You? My arm and fist quivered with the anticipation of smashing his vat-cloned face. You! I sneered. You're human now, remember? Yes, but certain cybrid functions remain. Do you remember when I touched your hand several days ago and brought us to the datum plane? I stared at him. I'm not going to datum plane again. No, nor am I. But I may need to relay incredible amounts of data to you within a very short period of time. I brought you to a black market surgeon in the dregs last night. She implanted a Schrone disc. Why? The Schrone loop was tiny, no larger than my thumbnail, and very expensive. It held countless field bubble memories, each capable of holding near infinite bits of information. Schrone loops could not be accessed by the biological carrier, and thus were used for courier purposes. A man or woman could carry AI personalities or entire planetary data spheres in a Schrone loop. Hell, a dog could carry all that. Why? I said again, wondering if Johnny or some forces beyond Johnny were using me as such a courier. Why? Johnny moved closer and put his hand around my fist. Trust me, Braun. I don't think I'd trusted anyone since Dad blew his brains out 20 years ago and Mom retreated into the pure selfishness of her seclusion. There was no reason in the universe to trust Johnny now. But I did. I relaxed my fist and took his hand. All right, said Johnny. Finish your meal and we'll get busy trying to save our lives. Weapons and drugs were the two easiest things to buy in Dreg's Hive. We spent the last of Johnny's considerable stash of black marks to buy weapons. By 2200 hours, we each wore whiskered Titan Poly body armor. Johnny had a Gunda's mirror black helmet, and I wore a Force Surplus command mask. Johnny's power gauntlets were massive and bright red. I wore osmosis gloves with killing trim. Johnny carried an Ouster hell whip captured on Brescia, and had tucked a laser wand in his belt. Along with Dad's automatic, I now carried a Steiner Ginn minigun on a gyroed waist brace. I was slave to my command visor. It was slave to my command visor, and I could keep both hands free while firing. Johnny and I looked at each other and began giggling. When the laughter stopped, there was a long silence. "Are you sure that the Shrike Temple here on Lucis is our best chance?" I asked for the third or fourth time. "We can't forecast," said Johnny. "All the Corps has to do is record a malfunction, and we're dead. We can't even take an elevator from the lower levels. We'll have to find unmonitored stairways and climb the 120 floors. The best chance to make the temple is straight down the Concourse Mall." "Yes, but will the Shrike Church people take us in?" Johnny shrugged, a strangely insectoid gesture in his combat outfit. The voice through the Gunda helmet was metallic. They're the only group which has a vested interest in our survival, and the only ones with enough political pull to shield us from the hegemony while finding transit for us to Hyperion. I pushed up my visor. Mina Gladstone said that no future pilgrimage flights to Hyperion would be allowed. The dome of mirror black nodded judiciously. "Well, fuck Mina Gladstone," said my poet lover. I took a breath and walked to the opening of our niche, our cave, our last sanctuary. Johnny came up behind me. Body armor rubbed against body armor. "Ready, Braun?" I nodded, brought the minigun around on its pivot, and started to leave. Johnny stopped me with a touch. "I love you, Braun." I nodded, still tough. I forgot that my visor was up, and he could see my tears. So, shit has gotten real. Crowning moment of badass? Art thou actually in Hyperion, Cantos? Yes, yes you are. The hive is awake all 28 hours of the day, but through some tradition, third shift was the quietest, the least populated. We would have had a better chance at the height of first shift rush hour along the pedestrian causeways. But if the Goondas and Thuggies were waiting for us, the death toll of civilians would have been staggering. It took us more than 3 hours to climb our way to Concourse Mall, not up a single staircase, but along an endless series of mech corridors, abandoned access verticals swept clean by the Luddite riots 80 years ago, and a final stairway that was more rust than metal. We exited onto a delivery corridor less than half a click from the Shrike Temple. "I can't believe it was so easy," I whispered to him on the intercom. "They are probably concentrating people on the spaceport and private Farcaster clusters." We took the least exposed walkway onto the concourse, 30 meters below the first shopping level, and 400 meters below the roof. The Shrike Temple was an ornate, freestanding structure now less than half a click away. A few off-hour shoppers and joggers glanced at us, and then moved quickly away. I had no doubt that the mall police were being paged, but I'd be surprised if they showed up too quickly. A gang of brightly painted street thugs exploded from a lift shaft, hollering and whooping. They carried pulse knives, chains, and power gauntlets. Startled, Johnny wheeled toward them with the hell whip, sending out a score of targeting beams. The minigun whirred out of my hands, shifting from aiming point to aiming point as I moved my eyes. The gang of 7 kids skidded to a halt, held up their hands, and backed away, eyes wide. They dropped into the lift shaft and were gone. I looked at Johnny. Black mirrors looked back. Neither of us laughed. We crossed to the northbound shopping lane. The few pedestrians scurried for open shop fronts. We were less than 100 meters from the temple stairs. I could actually hear my heartbeat in the Force helmet earphones. We were within 50 meters of the stairs. As if called, an acolyte or priest of some sort appeared at the 10-meter door of the temple and watched us approach. 30 meters. If anyone was going to intercept us, they would have done it before this. I turned toward Johnny to say something funny. At least 20 beams and half that many projectiles hit us at once. The outer layer of the Titan pulley exploded outward, deflecting most of the projectile energy in the counterblast. The mirrored surface beneath bounced most of the killing light. Most of it. Johnny was flung off his feet by the impact. I went to one knee and let the minigun train on the laser source. 10 stories up along the residential hive wall, my visor opaqued. Body armor burned off in a steam of reflective gas. The minigun sounded precisely like the kind of chainsaw they use in history holodramas. 10 stories up, a 5-meter section of balcony and wall disintegrated in a cloud of explosive flechettes and armor-piercing rounds. 3 heavy slugs struck me from behind. I landed on my palms, silenced the minigun, and swiveled. There were at least a dozen of them on each level, moving quickly in precise combat choreography. Johnny had reached his knees and was firing the Hell Whip in orchestrated bursts of light, working his way through the rainbow to beat bounce defenses. One of the running figures exploded into flame as the shop window behind it turned into molten glass and spattered 15 meters onto the concourse. 2 more men came up over the level railings, and I sent them back with a burst from the minigun. An open skimmer came down from the rafters, repellers laboring as it banked around pylons. Rocket fire slammed into concrete around Johnny and me. Shop fronts vomited a billion shards of glass over us. I looked, blinked twice, targeted, and fired. The skimmer lurched sideways, struck an escalator with a dozen cowering civilians on it, and tumbled in a mass of twisting metal and exploding ordnance. I saw one shopper leap in flames to the hive floor 80 meters below. "Left!" shouted Johnny over the tight beam intercom. 4 men in combat armor had dropped from an upper level using personal lift packs. The polymerized chameleon armor labored to keep up with the shifting background, but only succeeded in turning each man into a brilliant kaleidoscope of reflections. One moved inside the sweep arc of my minigun to neutralize me, while the other 3 went for Johnny. He came in with a pulse blade, ghetto style. I let it chew at my armor, knowing it would get through to forearm flesh, but using it to buy the second I needed. I got it. I killed the man with the rigid edge of my gauntlet, and swept the minigun fire into the 3 worrying Johnny. Their armor went rigid, and I used the gun to sweep them backward like someone hosing down a littered sidewalk. Only one of the men got to his feet before I blew them all off the level overhang. Johnny was down again. Parts of his chest armor were gone, melted away. I smelled cooking flesh, but saw no mortal wounds. I half crouched, half lifted him. "Leave me, Braun! Run! The stairs!" The tight beam was breaking up. "Fuck off!" I said, getting my left arm around him enough to support him while allowing room for the minigun to attack. "I'm still getting paid to be your bodyguard." They were sniping at us from both walls of the hive, the rafters, and the shopping levels above us. I counted at least 20 bodies on the walkways. About half were brightly clad civilians. The power assist on the left leg of my armor was grinding. Straight-legged, I awkwardly pulled us another 10 meters toward the temple stairs. There were several Shrike priests at the head of the stairs now, seemingly oblivious to the gunfire all around them. Above! I swiveled, targeted, and fired in one moment. Hearing the gun go empty after one burst and seeing the second skimmer get off its missiles in the instant before it became 1,000 pieces of hurtling, unrelated metal and torn flesh. I dropped Johnny heavily to the pavement and fell on him, trying to cover his exposed flesh with my body. The missiles detonated simultaneously, several in airburst and at least 2 burrowing. Johnny and I were lifted into the air and hurled 15 or 20 meters down the pitching walkway. Good thing. The alloy and ferro-concrete pedestrian strip where we had been a second before burned, bubbled, sagged, and tumbled down onto the flaming walkway below. There was a natural moat there now, a gap between most of the other ground troops and us. I rose, slapped away the useless minigun and mount, pulled off useless shards of my own armor, and lifted Johnny in both hands. His helmet had been blown off, and his face was very bad. Blood seeped through a score of gaps in his armor. His right arm and left foot had been blown off. I turned and began carrying him up the Shrike Temple stairs. There were sirens and security skimmers filling the concourse fly space now. The goondas on the upper levels and far side of the tumbled walkway ran for cover. 2 of the commandos who had dropped on lift packs ran up the stairs after me. I did not turn. I had to lift my straight and useless left leg for every step. I knew that I had been seriously burned on my back and side, and there were shrapnel wounds elsewhere. The skimmers whooped and circled, but avoided the temple steps. Gunfire rattled up and down the mall. I could hear metal-shod footsteps coming rapidly behind me. I managed another 3 steps. 20 steps above, impossibly far away, the bishop stood among 100 temple priests. I made another step and looked down at Johnny. One eye was open, staring up at me. The other was closed with blood and swollen tissue. "It's all right," I whispered, aware for the first time that my own helmet was gone. "It's all right. We're almost there." I managed one more step. The 2 men in bright black combat armor blocked my way. Both had lifted visors streaked with deflection scars, and their faces were very hard. "Put him down, bitch, and maybe we'll let you live." I nodded tiredly, too tired to take another step or do anything but stand there and hold him in both arms. Johnny's blood dripped on white stone. "I said put the son of a bitch down and—" I shot both of them, one in the left eye and one in the right, never lifting Dad's automatic from where I held it under Johnny's body. They fell away. I managed another step, and then another. I rested a bit and then lifted my foot for another. At the top of the stairs, the group of black and red robes parted. The doorway was very tall and very dark. I did not look back, but I could hear from the noise behind us that the crowd on the concourse was very large. The bishop walked by my side as I went through the doors and into the dimness. I laid Johnny on the cool floor. Robes rustled around us. I pulled my own armor off where I could, then batted at Johnny's. It was fused to his flesh in several places. I touched his burned cheek with my good hand. "I'm sorry." Johnny's head stirred slightly, and his eye opened. He lifted his bare left hand to touch my cheek, my hair, the back of my head. "Fanny." I felt him die then. I also felt the surge as his hand found the neural shunt, the white light warmth of the surge as the Schroen loop to the Schroen loop as everything Johnny Keats ever was or would be exploded into me. Almost it was like his orgasm inside me 2 nights earlier. The surge and throb and sudden warmth and stillness after, with the echo of sensation there. I lowered him to the floor and let the acolytes remove the body, taking it out to show the crowd and the authorities and the ones who waited to know. I let them take me away. I spent 2 weeks in a Shrike Temple recovery creche. Burns healed, scars removed, alien metal extracted, skin grafted, flesh regrown, nerves rewoven. And still I hurt. Everyone except the Shrike priests lost interest in me. The Corps made sure that Johnny was dead, that his presence in the Corps had left no trace, that his cybrid was dead. The authorities took my statement, revoked my license, and covered things up as best they could. The web press reported that a battle between dregs-level hive gangs had erupted onto the Concourse Mall. Numerous gang members and innocent bystanders were killed. The police contained it. A week before word came that the hegemony would allow the Yggdrasil to sail with pilgrims for the war zone near Hyperion, I used a temple farcaster to cast to Renaissance Vector, where I spent an hour alone in the archives there. The papers were in vacuum press, so I could not touch them. The handwriting was Johnny's. I had seen his writing before. The parchment was yellow and brittle with age. There were 2 fragments. The first read, "The day is gone, and all its sweets are gone." Sweet voice, sweet lips, soft hand, and softer breast, warm breath, light whisper, tender semitone. Bright eyes, accomplished shape, and languorous waist. Faded the flower and all its budded charms. Faded the sight of beauty from my eyes. Faded the shape of beauty from my arms. Faded the voice, warmth, whiteness, paradise. Vanished unseasonably at shut of eve, when the dusk holiday, or holy night, of fragrant curtained love begins to weave. The woof of darkness thick, for hid delight. But, as I've read love's missal through today, he'll let me sleep, seeing I fast and pray. The second fragment was in a wilder hand, and on rougher paper, as if slashed across a notepad in haste. This living hand, now warm and capable of earnest grasping, would, if it were cold, and in the icy silence of the tomb, so haunt thy days and chill thy dreaming nights that thou wouldst wish thine own heart dry of blood. So in my veins red life might stream again, and thou be conscience calmed. See, here it is. I hold it towards you. I'm pregnant. I think that Johnny knew it. I don't know for sure. I'm pregnant twice. Once with Johnny's child, and once with the Schroenloop memory of what he was. I don't know if the 2 are meant to be linked. It will be months before the child is born, and only days before I face the Shrike. But I remember those minutes after Johnny's torn body was taken out to the crowd, and before I was led away for help. They were all there in the darkness, hundreds of the priests and acolytes and exorcists and ostiaries and worshippers. And as one voice they began to chant, there in that red dimness under the revolving sculpture of the Shrike, and their voices echoed in Gothic vaults. And what they chanted went something like this. "Blessed be she! Blessed be the mother of our salvation! Blessed be the instrument of our atonement! Blessed be the bride of our creation! Blessed be she!" I was injured and in shock. I didn't understand it then. I don't understand it now. But I know that, when the time arrives and the Shrike comes, Johnny and I will face it together. It was long after dark. The tramcar rode between stars and ice. The group sat in silence, the only sound the creak of cable. After a time had passed, Lenar Hoyt said to Braun Lamia, "You also carry the cruciform." Lamia looked at the priest. Colonel Cassad leaned toward the woman. Do you think Het Mastine was the Templar who had spoken to Johnny?
Possibly, said Braun Lamia. I never found out. Kassad did not blink.
Were you the one who killed Mastine?
No. Martin Silenus stretched and yawned. We have a few hours before sunrise, he said. Anyone else interested in getting some sleep? Several heads nodded.
I'll stay up to keep watch, said Fedman Kassad. I'm not tired.
I'll keep you company, said the consul. I'll eat some coffee for the therm, said Braun Lamia. When the others slept, the infant Rachel making soft cooing sounds in her sleep, the other three sat at the windows and watched the stars burn cold and distant in the high night. And that was the detective's tale, the tale of Braun Lamia, The Long Goodbye. I think it's The Long Goodbye. Yes, after the come on, where are you? After the novel by it's that classic noir detective novel, which ties in actually to Braun Lamia's name because yeah, The Long Goodbye, because in Braun Lamia's name you can actually make Marlowe, which is the main character of said novel. So what did that story have in it? Let's see. What didn't it have? What didn't the Detective's Tale have going on? Good golly. It was a cyberpunk thriller par excellence with more William Gibson references than you can shake a stick at. Um, they're right down to Braun Lamia carrying a Schroen loop a la Johnny Mnemonic, right down to Johnny being called Johnny. Uh, let's see. It's a noir detective story. It's a whodunit murder story in the vein of The Long Goodbye. It is. Um, it opens up the context and horizons of the Hyperion tale way open. it's like now the AIs are involved and it's like, oh shit, that's what's going on? Some of what's going on? Oh, you don't know the half of it. Oh, the places we will go, friends. The places we will go. Ah, that one is probably the most intense story in the lot, although maybe not as much of an emotional jerker, tour de force, as some of the previous. Each one is superb. This one shows an amazing blending of different literary elements. It has one of the best cyberpunk action sequences ever written. It's got, yeah, it's got it all, man. It's got it all. And women, I don't know. And everybody in between. It's got everything. It's got human passion. It's got mystery. It's got it all. It's a good one. Um, so one of the perks of being able to divvy this one into two is I get to use more Hyperion covers. As it is, I think I'm still going to have one or two left over, but they're kind of bland. And Yeatsy, if I'm pronouncing that correctly on Twitch, says what face? And that was at 1,300 hours and 42 minutes. There's a million things that could have been in relation to basically the entire second half of that is one wham, 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 wham after another. It's pretty phenomenal. So, hopefully people dug that. The next installment will be the last, actually, of Hyperion, and then we get into the fall of Hyperion. Let me just double check the length of this one. I'm fairly confident. Yeah, we'll do that in one. It's going to be longer than this one was. It's going to be longer than the previous one was. This is much better for my energy level. Because by the time I get to the end of these like 50-page ones, I'm like tapped. Also dehydrated. Also, usually I need to go to the bathroom pretty badly. Revealing a bit too much about the process here, but it's part of it. Um, oh my god, but the ending is so good. The ending is so good. I cannot spoil. I'm not going to say anything. We do have a last tale contained therein, but I'm going to leave it as a surprise as to whose it is. Um, but this one, it's killer. It's just so good. Uh, I'm glad someone cajoled me into reading it aloud. Um, and I'm glad I committed to doing it because oh gosh, it's so much fun. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. Oh my god, it's so good. I'm gushing. I'm gushing. Anyway, so next Wednesday is looking dicey. Uh, Tentatively assume that I'm not going to be able to do one next Wednesday because I got a bunch of other stuff I got to get done next week, and Wednesday's kind of having to pick up the slack on that. Some of it is stuff I keep delaying and putting off, and some of it is other new stuff. So there probably won't be a stream Wednesday. We will still be doing Monday and Friday. Next Friday, will be the final installment, Chapter 6 of Hyperion by Dan Simmons, and it's going to be another roller coaster. A great roller coaster. This one's going to be good too. I'm quite fond. I am quite fond of how Hyperion ends. And then from there, we'll probably be doing a regular Friday schedule, doing between 30 and 50 pages every week until we're done with the Fall of Hyperion. I will eventually get to Endymion, the Endymion duology by Dan Simmons. That's probably not going to be for most of a year or more. Because there's other stuff that I have committed to read in the meantime, some of which is also by Dan Simmons, but also Destination Void and The Three Body Problem, which I've just finished a read through of my own time to refresh me on what happens in that. I may have to put up one of those advisories before reading in terms of oh yes, oh yes. The Scholar's Tale, Optical Antenna, is maybe one of my favorite short stories of all time. It's so well done. It is absolutely phenomenal. Um, it deals with crisis of faith. It deals with ethics. It deals with um, just the trials of Job type of thing. It deals with the human condition. So this is one of Dan Simmons, man. Dan Simmons nails it. And would you believe that I've barely read any Dan Simmons outside of Hyperion, the Hyperion Cantos, and the two Endymion, the Endymion duology, until very recently. Which is, yes, borderline criminal, I realize, but he's just so good. Um, I also definitely want to read at least one of the culture novels by Ian M. Banks this year. I do not care which one it is. I want to read one. Probably I'm just going to do them chronologically. If I don't commit to doing one this year, I'll at least do The Algebraist because that's another favorite of mine. The Algebraist is a lot of fun, and it's basically a culture novel in everything but name. It has a lot of his signatures in it. Banks's signatures. He's great. He's another, like, in terms of like rollicking space opera adventure. He and Dan Simmons are cream of the crop. Absolute cream of the crop. Um, Nobody does it better. Other than that, I'm gonna do at least one Greg Egan book this year. I don't know which one yet. One of his novels, one of his earlier novels. Probably I'll just do what's the one that comes right after the one I did? What was the one I did? Give me a sec. Give me a sec. Quarantine. Quarantine's the one I did. So I'll probably do. I think it's Permutation City is the next one along that he published.
Um, I know someone's asked for. I'm losing my voice. Great. I think somebody. What was it? The one somebody in the comments a while back had asked for. I want to say it was distress. It might have been Terranesia though. I get I get some of them very confused, sadly, because it's been a long time since I read through them. I do want to read Incandescence. I definitely want to read Shield's Ladder at some point. That one is just that one broke my brain in a good way. So I do want to read that one aloud. But yeah, so there's a lot of stuff we're going to read this year. Um, Somebody did specifically request the Jesus incident, which is why I'm going to have to do Destination Void. I'll get around to reading that. Um, I am not going to commit to doing the entire Destination Void series in one go, nor am I going to commit to doing the entire Three Body Problem trilogy in one go. I'll probably trade between them like I did the other two trilogies, which means I'll probably start with Destination Void, then do Three Body, then do Jesus Incident, then do um, what's it called? It's not Dark Forest, is the second one, or is second one Dark Forest? Yes, second one is Dark Forest. Then Lazarus Effect, then whatever the third of that trilogy is. They are just out of my sight range. I can see them on the wall. They're just out of range. Death's End. That's it. Um, Squinting a lot. And then The Ascension Factor by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom. Because I think all three after Destination Void are Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom, come to think of it. They are where that series takes off, and it turns into a hell of a series in terms of cultural explorations of science fictional culture. Um, I think they're up there with Dune and what C.J. Sherry winds up doing. That's another one I want to read. Some more in the what is it called? Merchant or Alliance universe? What is that called? I can never remember the name of of that literary universe she cobbled together. Oh, Derpy Shark says, "Have you ever read Old Man's War? I thought that one was a pretty funny one. If I did, I'm not remembering it offhand. Give me a sec. I can't whistle into that. People will scream. CJ Cherry. Bibliography. Alliance Union, not Alliance Merchanter. She's still around, right? Yes. Oh, thank goodness. Oh, and she got married in 2014 to Jane Suzanne Fanchar. Good for them. Good for them. Oh, and they're out of Spokane, Washington. Oh, that's very interesting. One of my favorite audiobooks of all time, audiobook readers of all time, is in Spokane, Washington. Um, Reed McCollum. This one's for you, Reed. Hear why I'm doing this. Okay, Old Man's War. I know I've seen the name before, but I don't know if I've read. Oh, Scalzi! I actually have a copy of this. I have a copy of this. I have to find where I put it. Give me a sec. I'm looking at my Scalzi stuff. Because I don't have a ton of Scalzi, but I'm 99% sure that's in there. Oh, where are you? And I think where are you? No, that's Manfac by Martin Caden. No, no, that's not it. Haldor Lives. No, I got some pulpy stuff I want to read because I have fun with that. So there, I have fun. I have fun with pulpy stuff. I know I've got a copy of Old Man's War floating around. Where do I have that? Anyway, yes, we'll get around to that one. I couldn't remember the author name. Once I know the author name, it's like, oh, that might be it. And then looking at the premise, nope, that's my bizarre collection of Bert Cole novels. Don't worry about it. If you've read Bert Cole, you know those will be kind of tough to justify reading aloud on stream because they are racy. They're good. Some of them. They're fun. They're just, you know, kind of weird. Kind of hard. You sort of. What's a good way to put this? You kind of had to be there. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, actually. You had to be there. They encompass a certain aspect of the zeitgeist of like the 70s into 80s Cold War coming down from Vietnam that makes sense in context, but isn't easy for people who weren't there to feel anything for or are just confused by. Which isn't to say that they don't kind of get some of it across, but it's sort of tough to explain. Oh, here we go. No, no, I didn't even know I had these. I need to get another bookshelf, is what I need to do. I had no idea I had this. Oh, I know when I got this. There was a dirt cheap book sale at a place near me. Don't fall. I'm gonna pick that up and deal with that in a minute. Um, yes, Old Man's War is quite good. Um, what's a good way to how does one describe Old Man's War? So it's a good military sci-fi, but in the sense that it's kind of is that the one where people get put into different bodies or genetically engineered bodies? Or am I thinking of it's kind of like Avatar but good. No, that's okay, so I'm getting it confused with two other books. Um ah, what is that one called? The Rooks of Saturn by author whose name I can't remember, and the blatant ripoff thereof called, I think, Manta's Gift by Timothy Zahn. If you recognize the name Timothy Zahn, it's because he wrote like some of the only Star Wars. He wrote a significant percentage of the only Star Wars expanded universe literature worth reading. Um, that seems harsh. Not all of it is his. Of the worth reading is his. Oh, geez, which is Old Man's War? I'll have to reread it, obviously, but I do have some Scalzi. Not a mountain of Scalzi, but I have some Scalzi. I don't. Oh, this says it is part of a series. I do not have all of those books, so I will have to grab the rest of them at some point when I have room on my shelves. Anyway, yes. If somebody is requesting Old Man's War, it is now added to the list. Shoni. All right, that's enough blathering from me. I'm gonna get scootling. Y'all have fun. Um, Wikipedia says this article's plot summary may be too long or excessively detailed. Okay, what does that mean? Is there such a thing? And it's not. It's less than it's like one page. Come on, get out of here, Wikipedia. You're drunk. Anyway, um, if I have read Old Man's War, it's been so long that I can't remember the details. Sorry. I don't have a ton of Scalzi. Um, I have some, but not a mountain of it. At any rate, so those are some of the ramblings from Frag. Yeah, that's it. I'll keep doing next week again. Wednesday will not be on, but that's okay. I'll still be doing Monday, Mecha Mondays, where we're reading through actually the novelization of Mobile Suit Gundam, which is pretty good. It's actually very good science fiction, I would argue. Tomino very much has read good stuff and uses a lot of good ideas and is fairly internally consistent in his novelization as well as the series itself. Things get a little wild later, but it's little details. It's little details that show, oh yeah, yeah, no, thought went into this. Um, so it's pretty good. With that, I'm gonna go. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. If you are listening to this for the first time, I do broadcast normally on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, starting at about noon, 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, or daily time, or U.S. East Coast time. East Coast U.S. time. There we go. Um, so if you want to catch me live, you can. Otherwise, hi. Um, this time, I promise I'll have the playlists updated. I promise. I'm not going to go to the end of the month. He said. He said, convincing no one. So with that, I'm going to go. Everybody out there, stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. And have a good one. See you all later.